Today's video is going to be a build vlog, putting together some of the upper armor pieces, the pauldrons, the chest plate that I made. It also has patterns and a DIY section where I go through my normal how-to formats and make the abdominal pad that comes out from underneath the upper armor, and the patterns for that are on Facebook. Okay, so first I'm starting off with an old t-shirt, and how I chose the fit and the size of this t-shirt was based on how it fit over me wearing the two shirts I'm going to be wearing underneath this, if that makes sense. They're two long sleeve shirts, both thermal, and they add a decent amount of size over my body. So I didn't want a shirt that was too tight or too loose to make this pattern, since it had to go over 2 layers of clothing already. So I marked what the front is on the sleeves, and I also took a paint marker, and following where this seam is, I just drew a line on both of these sleeves so that I know where to match it up with whenever I have my front and rear pieces of the pattern. So now I'm going to go ahead and start to draw out my cutout areas. Okay, the armpit area itself is not needed. In fact, it would probably restrict your movement fairly. And the other line I drew is straight across here, and that's where my chest plate is going to end. And how I figured out where that line was I put the shirt on, I lined it up looking in a mirror where I wanted to have it placed as far as height-wise, and then I drew a line that was about a ½ inch below that, giving myself some margin for error since I can cut some off, but I can't add more back onto it. Okay, I cut it along the bottom here and then fold it in half and then cut out my armpit area. And then I took my scissors and I cut along the seams of the bottom of the sleeves on both sleeves, and I also cut here along the sides. Next, I'm going to cut off my sleeves, and I'm going to cut along this top seam here, separating it into 4 pieces total. Okay, I have my pattern pieces laid out on my fabric. This is where I cut the front and the back. I ended up doing it behind the seam here. And the back piece, I did cut the collar out of both shirts, since this fabric that I'm making this out of is not stretchy in the same way that t-shirts are. And then there is the 2 sleeves sitting there. Alright, I have traced out all the patterns, but I think it's important that I show you how I trace them out. So I allow 1/3 of an inch at the bottom so that I can fold that over and sew it. I extend the side here because these are actually going to have Velcro on both sides. And I extend this seam here and put some dots marking where the actual pattern is, because these are going to be sewed and then flipped. Same with this. I need room to sew on this top seam. Same on this side. And just like them, I mark where it actually needs to be sewed to form the seam line itself. And on the back, same thing. Extend the edges where the Velcro will be, and then extend around for sewing on and marking where your actual seams should be. And for the sleeves, same deal. I marked the back and the front so I don't get the 2 pieces confused. In the area, again, where the Velcro is going to be applied to this. And of course, I mark the dots, and of course I mark the line where it needs to match up with the combined seam of the front and the rear. Okay, I've gone ahead and pinned down the edges here on my sleeves, and I'm not going to fold over this edge and stitch it because this is going to be stitched to the combined front and back. But I want to sew up the edges here so that I don't have any sort of frays and it just doesn't look ugly. So I pinned the edges of both the sleeves, and remember, that's why I did extend them there. I either extended them for Velcro, or I extended them so that I could fold them and stitch them. And this is for the back. The front, I've actually already gone ahead and stitched around and pulled out my pins. I stitched around the collar area where my head's going to go through. I stitched around the sides and even on the ends where the Velcro is going to go, and on the bottom as well. Okay, I finished all the edges around the opening for my head and around the sides and the bottom. So now what I'm doing is pinning these seams together, and then I'll stitch it along here and remove the pins. And whenever that's done, I will be closer to having an actual shirt looking thing. I don't know what this is. Gamberson tunic? I don't know. If there's any medieval armor experts and you could equate this to something in medieval armor from the Mandalorian armor, I'd really like to hear about it in the comments. Alright, I've sewed together the two seams for the top, and now it's actually starting to look a little bit like a shirt. I put it on, my head fits just fine. Hole's not too big, not too small. For eyeballing it, I calculated that pretty much right. And now I've gone ahead and pinned on the sleeve, making sure that I had the front side of the sleeve facing towards the front. I'm going to pin on the other sleeve, sew them both together, put on my Velcro, and then start gluing on all this armor I've been building. I know, right? I end off with like, I'm going to sew the sleeves on, and then bam, I'm wearing it. But again, this is not so much a how-to video as an explanation video. I'm just showing you what I'm doing versus can't really teach. I mean, I guess I could teach you how to stitch really badly, but the bottom seams here with my ugly stitches have been folded over and glued in place with some fabric glue. And the other seams that I needed to have folded and lay flat were right here where the two sleeves go together. If you don't have the seam laying down, this is going to puff out much like, well, like puffy sleeves on a blouse. So if you want that, like, that's a thing, you can have that. But I didn't want puffy sleeves. I wanted to lay down like an actual t-shirt. Same thing with this here, these top seams too. And if you look at a t-shirt, notice this several stitching. First, they stitch together the two sides, which once again would make these two sides puff up. But they have this other flat piece that pushes all these seams down. And you'll notice even the seams here on the collar are stitched so that it lays flat. If you don't have this, any one of these intersections will be puffy. They won't be laying flat and straight. This will be puffed up, and this will be puffed up, and it will look really, really funny, I suppose. Like I say, unless you're going for that look, then sure. But yeah, so that's one important takeaway. My wife already told me that she's going to go through and rip these out with a seam ripper after she like restitches it with a proper straighter stitch. I mean, I did as well as I could. This top part here is of course hid by the cape. Now as far as how I glued them on, I can say that yes, it was while listening to the Signet Forging Armor theme from The Mandalorian Season 1. But also that how I did it was I used hot glue. And I'm wearing a t-shirt and two thermal shirts. You don't want to just throw this on and try to hot glue it. You'll end up burning yourself. Duh. But all these dark areas here are where the hot glue actually connected and bonded. Which means that up here at the top, it's not connected. Because this goes straight, my actual shape of my body goes back, and the cape collar comes around and goes down into here. And I know you saw me wearing the cape and collar. Don't worry, I will get to how I made that in the end of the video. It's ridiculously simple, and I did next to no sewing. But again, I just captured the shape of this. If you actually look at his costume, there's a lot of stitching. There's double stitching here. There's a thicker area through here that looks like a belt. There's stitches going up the sides. I obviously didn't do that. I made this extremely simple. But yeah, that's how I'm going to attach the back plate as well, which will have the rocket. And of course, I haven't made that yet. But what I have come up with patterns for, what we're going to make next, if you look at action figures or him in the show, you'll notice there's a gray pad that comes down below the belt area, and his belt goes over it. So something I can do in my traditional, typical video style of how to is assemble these patterns. And I'm not going to glue it in. It's going to be Velcroed in, so it can be removed and stored more easily, so it's not just this big long piece with these sleeves and the back and everything. And I almost forgot. The shiny areas, shiny dark areas, yeah, that's where the hot glue contacted. But I also peeled this back a bit because I know the hot glue ain't going to hold it. And I put super glue down in and then made sure that it also dripped through from the back. Anywhere I could feel that hot glue lumped up, I dripped it through to make sure that this is, like, you hear that? That's how solid the super glue made this. But with the 2 layers of shirts, it's not going to be uncomfortable. I can't even feel it. Technically 3, because I have a t-shirt, 2 thermal shirts, and then this. Anyways. Now, if you have a type of fabric that doesn't have synthetics in it, which this does, super glue doesn't always work very well. You may have to do something else, like use a spray adhesive, or use a curved suture needle, and sew through into the foam. I don't know. Like I said, I got lucky that I had this curtain donated that one side kind of had the look and the color of what I wanted, and the other side was just the, like, couch pillow upholstery pleather. But that stuff I know is synthetic, and I knew it would glue. So, bam, there's that. Okay. Your number 1 is rather large, so I had to split it into a couple sections you'll have to put together to actually make the full pattern. Sorry, but you'll have to use some tape. And number 1, I'm using 5mm just because it's large enough that I don't have to glue 2 sheets together. And then for all these other pieces, 2, 3, 4, I don't know why I did 2 3s. I only really need 1. But 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. These dotted lines here, I'm going to put a cut through my 7 with an X-Acto knife. But all these other pieces are going to be 6mm. And then you'll need another 6 and another 7 for over there as well. Just to get through the video a little quicker, I'm going to go ahead and glue all these together at once. Okay, well, I'm waiting on my contact cement to finish. You'll notice I actually marked out where the 2 and the 3 is going to go on my 1. And I didn't really mark the rest. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. But I wanted to start it off centered and figured I could place the rest myself. Alright, now that it's all put together, I'm going to go ahead and use my heat gun to put a bit more of a curve in this so it actually match up with my body better, hopefully. Alright, I got it curved to fit my body, and then I took some masking and covered the top here. However, I don't want any of that adhesive getting onto here. If it does, the problem will be that it is ultimately going to make it very difficult to glue my Velcro to it. Just won't work quite right. Okay, last thing I'm going to do before some sanding and sealing this is I need to put an edge on it, like some trim. Now I don't want this to go up too high. So how I'm going to start it is, I'm going to start it right where the Velcro is, pretty much flush. And by about here, I'm going to make it as flush as I can with the top of the piece. And then once I get to the edge here, I'm just going to cut off the excess so it doesn't really go any further than the other side. Make sure that's good on there. Okay, and then the excess I have here, just going to go ahead and trim off with some sharp scissors so that that is flush. Actually going to save this in case I need to use it for another part of the project or another project and completely different from this later. Okay, now I'm gonna take some super glue and just go around this, just make sure it's really on there and not going to come apart. Alright, I got my area masked off and I used some super thin super glue, which unfortunately I kept dripping everywhere, but it doesn't really matter. I just wanted to make sure that none of this stuff that I contact cemented was going to come back apart. Like I say, this Dollar General brand sealant. So it gives a good texture, but has a tendency to want to pull things. I have a feeling it's either going to want to make this straight or it's going to curve it more this way as it dries. And when that happens, a lot of times it wants to pull some of the contact cemented pieces off. So this is my way to try to prevent that, just by sealing it up with some super glue. Okay, I'm gonna go skateboard and let this dry. Alright, that was fun. I came back. It was pretty much dried up. It had been about 6 hours. And I went ahead and just painted it a matte gray. I did this with an airbrush, but you could paint it by hand. It doesn't really matter. Airbrushing is just the quickest way for me to get it done. You can paint it by hand. Spray paint doesn't really matter. Alright, interesting turn of events. So, I put this on, my cosplay, and I thought, I want to see how this is going to hold up paint-wise with the belt. I knew the sealer would be okay, and 15-20 minutes it was fine. About a half hour or so of moving around, it had already started to wear the paint off, which I was worried would happen, but I had to try it anyway. So what I ended up resorting to was covering each and every single piece with fabric. So initially the idea was to cover the pieces in this stuff, which is literally just called craft fabric. It's not a good fabric to sew with. You can't iron it because it will melt, but it is dirt cheap. I think 2 yards of this fabric was $2.99 plus tax, I believe. It's very inexpensive, but it's not good for much except for gluing to things to make them look tactical. And that's what I used on this. I think this specific brand is like Ollie Fun Time Craft Fabric. They didn't actually write it on their handwritten receipt, but is it the bottom? No. Anyways, so what I had to do was basically retrace the patterns. However, for some of these pieces that curve a lot, like this one here and this one here, the pattern will come up too short, so you'll have to kind of lengthen it. You can either do that by tracing around it and matching it up and trimming off the inside until you get it to fit, or you can just cut the pattern in half and space it about 6 millimeters, and that should give you about the distance to cover it. But yeah, it wasn't fun. I didn't want to do this, but I ended up having to do it. And I contact cemented all this stuff on. It was a lot of fumes, took a long time. It wasn't fun. But this looks good, and this will hold up underneath the belt, unlike the paint, which unfortunately I was hoping would hold up, but it didn't. So after I glued all this on, I did take my airbrush with some gray to even it out, because the adhesive did discolor it a bit. I contact cemented it on, and then I did super glue around the edges to make sure they wouldn't peel off or come loose. So, I mean, it's there. Okay, as for what I was using as the cloak or the cape and slash collar, is the stuff that I had from a previous cosplay, and that cosplay was Kylo Ren, and I decided I'm probably never going to wear that again, so I repurposed it, and what I basically did was I just sewed 2 layers together, and I put some Velcro. And how the Velcro works is, okay, I simply just take one end of this big rectangle that I have my Velcro on, and then it just wraps around my neck like this, and then I just attach the Velcro. Now, there we go. Yeah, and it just loops around. Now, I thought I was going to have to put foam in here to make a collar, but since I had made the top half of the cape 2 layers, whenever I fold this over and sewed it together, it was durable enough and heavy enough to just stand up like a collar. In that respect, I lucked out. That was just luck on my part. It wasn't some bright decision or anything from me. But yeah, this is just a rectangle of fabric. Basket weave fabric is definitely not what his cloak in the show is made out of. But like I say, a lot of stuff in this costume are just me using things that I have. And I have this. Now, as far as what I think his cloak is made out of, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's wool or something like that. It reminds me, just from the texture, of like an old army blanket that I would find at a surplus. And same thing with stuff that his armor is attached to. Parts of it looks like wool and parts of it looks like leather. It's obviously not a curtain like what I made mine out of. And as far as the shirt goes, it's just like a Long John's thermal shirt. I just got it in brown. Although if I wouldn't have been able to find it in brown, I would have had to buy it and dye it. Underneath it is just another thermal shirt that helps to pad it out and make it look a little bit more bulky. And then once that's on, I have to put this on over it with the cape after that. And then once the cape is on, before I put on the gauntlets, I have to put this on and my belt over this. Now, I have a feeling once this is completed, in order for me to put the entire cosplay on, more than what you saw in the photos, which is just part of the waist up, because I don't even have the belt and bandolier done, nor do I have like the jetpack or anything else done, but at this point it's about 40% completed, but I feel about 100% sure that I'm going to need help putting it on, as in I won't be able, most likely, to just throw all this stuff on myself once it's completed. And not really sure if I've stated it already or not, but just from cutting the t-shirt and making the patterns out of it to cutting this fabric and sewing it together, I worked on that non-stop for 13 hours to get it completed. I imagine a sewing machine would speed that up a lot and also make your stitching look a lot better, since my hand stitching doesn't look very good. Although I imagine it would probably be much longer than that if you wanted to do something screen accurate. Try to look up photos of that part of the costume, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And as mentioned, I wasn't really looking forward to covering this in cloth, but it is definitely durable and will hold up to the stress of having the belt and bandolier constantly rub against it. And then, of course, as far as the cape goes, I just happened to get lucky. Like, that's it. I happened to have the basket weave fabric, and all I had to do was cut it and do a little bit of stitching and throw some Velcro on it, and it just happened to work out. But that's also why this is a build vlog, more so than like a how-to video, as I normally label my videos, because this is not how-to territory for me. This is territory I don't know. I, in fact, watched how-to videos to figure out the stuff that I did, and the stuff they were doing in the videos is much more complicated. I simplified it so that I could do it myself. My wife could do it, but it wouldn't. With all the stuff going on in the holidays, I would feel really guilty if I asked her to do it. And also, she would take it to the next level, which would be great. And I'm not opposed to her making me a new one later. I could always, if I had to, just cut the armor off and put it on. I'll reglue it onto the new one, but for now, this is what I have. And the color's good, so I'm happy. Building stuff out of foam, comfort zone. Tailoring, scary. So yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. As always, thank you for watching. Hopefully this gave you some ideas and some direction for your projects at home. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And if you're not, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day.